triggered a tsunami that just wrecked the Crescent City Harbor in Del Norte County in my district. The damage was about $50 million, again, just short of the threshold to get disaster relief. But we got lucky because that same tsunami also hit a harbor in Santa Cruz, further south in the state, where some very fancy yachts were parked. And because those yachts enabled the damage tally to go a little higher, Crescent City did qualify for federal disaster relief. But imagine if some of those fancy boats had not been parked in the harbor at that time, we would have been left with nothing. So, Administrator Criswell, it seems to me that this is fundamentally unfair. And again, with more disasters coming, we really need to provide more flexible, equitable ways for devastated communities to qualify for federal disaster relief from FEMA. And my staff will be presenting you with a letter today. I'm asking you to work with us on this important issue. I believe you have existing authority that would let you do a rulemaking to provide that flexibility and equity. But if you need new authority, additional authority, I hope you will please let us know, and we will get to work to make it happen. Let me just leave it there and ask for your response, and I'm really hoping to hear a commitment to work with me on this critical issue.
Representative, you make some very good points, and it really does show why one of my priorities has been equitably delivering our programs. When it comes to declaring a disaster, we have a number of factors that we take into consideration, whether the state has the capacity to support it, not just the local jurisdictions, but also the amount of insurance and the amount of damage. And it can be very complex. And that is why we are continuing to work on ways that we can improve the way we're delivering our programs, but also better understand the barriers that communities, just as you mentioned, are experiencing to being able to get the assistance that they need in order to properly recover from these disasters. And so you have my commitment to continue to find ways that we can improve the way we're delivering our programs and ensuring that everybody who is eligible for our programs has access to that assistance.
All right, thank you. Yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the vice chair of the subcommittee, gentlelady from Oregon, Representative Chavez-Turime.
Thank you, Chairman. It's nice to meet you. I know we have not officially met, but as a new member of Congress, I'm grateful that you're here today to answer the questions that we have. So, Administrator Criswell, given your background at FEMA and in Colorado as a firefighter and a fire chief, I'm sure you have a unique and deep appreciation for the devastation caused by wildfires. One of my highest priorities is to find solutions to help Oregonians address the challenges of wildfires. On the House Committee on Agriculture, one of my top Farm Bill priorities is to properly equip our firefighters to get these wildfires under control and prevent them from getting out of hand in the first place. So far, I am championing 9 legislative items in the Congress to tackle these important issues, and this is an issue that I will continue to focus on. In 2020, the state of Oregon experienced its most devastating wildfire season on record, the Labor Day fires, which actually began in August and lasted until November. According to the Oregon Department of Emergency Management, the wildfires burned over 1 million acres, about the area of Rhode Island, affected 20 counties, destroyed or damaged over 5,000 structures, and resulted in over $600 million in damage across the state. The city of Detroit in Marion County was especially devastated by the fires, and my office continues to work with the city to help that community and region recover. In fact, this location was a required stop for my new staff. I had DC go to Oregon to understand what was most important to me and to visit as we set up our new offices. One specific area of frustration brought to my attention concerns Detroit's application to obtain unobligated funds for a water treatment plant. This process continued and has continued for 3 years after the fires. Detroit dutifully completed their paperwork and met FEMA's engineering requirements. However, high turnover at FEMA has forced the city to re-explain the application and re-justify each aspect of the project multiple times. The application's for $5.7 million. Completing the federal paperwork and meeting standards is hard enough, but how is it fair to require a small community to essentially recomplete it over and over again for 3 years? So my question to you is, can you offer any assurances today that FEMA will give the pending application full and fair consideration?
Absolutely, Representative. I will follow up on this personally and ensure that this application is reviewed and that we are giving it full and fair consideration based on the application that is submitted.
I'm happy to follow up. I'm happy to meet with you offline. You know, one of the things I like to do is open my office to get the work done. We have to move the ball down the field, and oftentimes after testimonies like this, it doesn't happen. So I'm committed to get this application moved forward. Regarding the high turnover, what steps can FEMA take to help ensure the agency is able to retain basic institutional knowledge when someone leaves? And then how can we reduce the burden on the applicant to bring someone new up to speed on an application such as this?
You know, the retention and the recruitment of our workforce is so critical. The majority of the personnel that we have, again, are our reservists, and they are the backbone of what we do, which is why we are very grateful to Congress for the passing of the CREW Act, which gives them USERRA protections, and we have now a broader pool of people that I feel that we can recruit from. And I have talked to reservists firsthand out in the field about how they are already benefiting from this piece of legislation, which is increasing the number of reservists that we can potentially count on. We're also offering new incentives. We're offering recruitment bonuses as well as administrative time off for our reservists after they demobilize. These little steps, I think, are also increasing the desire of our workforce to be able to bring in new people, but also helping them understand that we are there for them and that we recognize the value that they bring, and that makes them excited about their continued work in supporting survivors before, during, and after disasters.
Mr. Chairman, I see my time's going to expire, so I'll yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Representative Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You got a tough job, Ms. Griswold. You really, really do. All around this nation, there's some sort of a disaster going on almost all the time. Thank you. Thank you for your efforts. Thank you for the work that you and your team do. Obviously, all of us believe it to be extremely important, the recovery piece of it. Now, there's always a problem. And some of these problems are in the scope of the issues you face would seem to be mundane. We had a COVID crisis a couple of years ago. There were shutdowns. There were individual counties housed homeless people in separation so that they might not get sick or infect the community. One of those counties I happen to represent is awaiting reimbursement for their program. Region 9 made a decision that they wouldn't be paid. That decision appears to be contrary to your national guidance. We'd like you to look into it. We'll get you the specific information, and if you'd take a look at it. Has to do, not a great amount of money in the scope of what you're facing, but nonetheless important to Contra Costa County. So if you'll take a look at that, try to align your guidance with the Region 9 determination to not reimburse. Now, having said that, we'll just let that hang out there. We'll get you the specific information, and if you'll follow it up, we would appreciate it. But in the scope of the issues you have, good luck. We will never be able to deal with disasters unless we continue to press for mitigation. And the mitigation is one of your tasks. And there are a couple of mitigation programs that are of concern here. Specifically, the mitigation having to do with the water infrastructure. One of your programs does not seem to provide for firefighting water infrastructure. It may be a hydrant, it may be a tank. Could you please take a look at that? And if we're going to mitigate, for example, the Camp Fire or Lahontan, how do we do it without water and the water infrastructure? You have a program that can deal with that, and we need to make sure that that would be included. Again, we'll get you specific concerns that we have in California about that. The final point is your revolving loan fund program. It does, if it works, provide the state with money that they can then pass on to counties, cities, others, to get ahead of the problem by using that money to develop mitigation programs. However, you've awarded that to 7 states, about $50 million to 7 states and the District of Columbia. You got about $100 million available. So how about the other 50 million? Maybe you have as much as 200 million. It's not exactly clear how much money is in this revolving loan fund program. Can you push the money out, or is that money now being allocated for the disaster recovery? Please take a look at that. Obviously, California, other states who have spoken here today, the representatives have. What is the status? Can you push the rest of that money out, or is that going to depend upon the additional money that we must provide to FEMA? I don't know that you're up on this issue now. If you are, love to hear your comments. If you're not, I'm sure you'll get back to us.
Representative, the Storm Revolving Loan Fund is such an incredible tool to help our communities build resilience in areas where perhaps they don't have the funding to front some of the costs or even to cover the cost shares for some projects. And so we're very excited about this program. When we first got the authorization and the funding for this program, we wanted to make sure that we could get a portion of that funding out as quickly as possible. And so that's why we did a partial notice of funding opportunity for the initial $50 million that you mentioned. This program also requires, it's a first of its kind program, and it also requires that our state and our local partners build capacity to be able to administer such a program. And so while we did an initial notice of funding opportunity, we have also been working with our state and local partners to help them establish programs so they can administer this. And as we continue to go forward with this program, we will be issuing our notice of funding opportunities for the full amount of this program going forward, while we continue to work with building their capacity.
I'm out of time, but my final comment is I very, very much appreciate the task that you're doing and the extraordinary importance of it. So know that at least some of us want to really support you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I will recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and for the committee members for allowing me to sit in today. Appreciate it. A very important topic. And Ms. Criswell, thank you for your efforts with FEMA and difficult times. Pivoting off what Mr. Huffman said a while ago with tsunami and earthquake and wildfire and flood, and I think we can add pretty much all that in the area I represent adjacently, and who knows, maybe even volcanic eruptions on it someday with the possibilities. But I wanted to, in terms mostly of wildfire, my area has been devastated several times. Mr. Garamendi mentioned the Camp Fire right in my backyard, Paradise, California, only to be eclipsed by Lahaina and loss of life. Incredible. And the Dixie Fire in 21, 1 million acres, lost the town of Greenville and Canyon Dam. So the Lord's blessed us with much rainfall and snowpack this year, so we're not feeling so much of the size and scope of a wildfire that we've been kind of used to lately. But I wanted to speak with you about some of the practical matters. Again, it's hard to get things out the door quickly enough, and we understand that. And some really great work got done by FEMA, working with Cal OES and the local governments on those other fires, kind of having to build from the ground up on wildfire, since it hadn't been quite the big area that FEMA had to do in the past. So, but we're still having trouble on timing of things like that, and getting, whether it's been the housing, the trailers and things. I want to touch on what's called the North Complex Fire, centered in Butte County, California, a town, Berry Creek. And you might well be familiar with this. the Lake Madrone area of that in the North Complex fire, very, very, very well, very impacted, including their water delivery system for the community, and they have nothing there. So the water system was wiped out. So the district there, their water district submitted several public assistance claims, but it took years for the submission, then a denial, then an appeal, a denial again to take place for that assistance. And during that time, what was there of the water district, what the infrastructure was allowed to deteriorate even more. Part of it may well have been salvageable, but we couldn't get the teams out there, we couldn't get the coordination amongst everybody to look at the district and see what it really was gonna be and what level. So FEMA didn't meet their required deadlines to respond on that. So a lot of time and effort and maybe even valuable infrastructure was lost. So especially a really small town like that, like kind of like Mr. Huffman was talking about, are extremely impacted because they have limited staff, a limited ability to apply for this or ask for grants and things like that. So what I'd ask you is that if you could take, at your level, another look at Lake Madrone, the North Complex fire in Northern California, and see if you really believe they got a fair shake on that, because they absolutely need the assistance, and so much time went by before that they're just on the short end of it now. So, and then overall, I'd like to see if we could commit the coordination with the state folks more so, like Cal OES in our case, so our applicants can know what the resources can be more quickly and respond to that, so there's less local suffering, basically. So would your office be able to work with mine and with HUD, and as well as California's entities, to find a way to compact these timelines and not have these unnecessary delays?
Absolutely. On the first point, we will certainly take a look at the case that you mentioned. I obviously don't have the specifics on that here, but happy to take a look at that. And we have worked over the last 2 years to really figure out ways that we can be better engaged with our customers and have more, again, of a people-first approach, customer-centric approach to the way that we're delivering our programs. And sometimes it just takes that one-on-one communication. And so you do have my commitment to make sure that we're doing everything we can to work with the communities within your district, but across California and the rest of the country
Okay, I
to
appreciate
better
it.
understand that.
On the Madrone one, you know, it took a strong effort by my staff to finally say, everybody come to one meeting and meet on this. And that did happen, but it was quite a long time after the fire and the deterioration. One last one is that we need to look at things that happen post-wildfire that aren't necessarily the fire directly, but have a direct, the mudslides, let me talk about that, okay? Mudslide issues, or you can tie directly back to the cause being the wildfire, so we need to have after effects taken into account too. So do you think we can look at that process so that mudslides directly related to a fire could be part of that conversation?
It's definitely one of the concerns that we always have after a wildfire, and we do have post-wildfire hazard mitigation assessment teams that will go into communities and better understand what the cascading impacts might be and what types of mitigation projects we need to put in place now to help protect those communities. And so you have my commitment to continue working on that, and we're happy to provide your staff a briefing on what that work does.
Thanks very much. And then I'll just mention in 5 seconds, pre-positioning resources for wildfires would be a key component as well going forward. So, Madam Chairman, thank you for the time. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. LaMalfa. The chair will recognize Mr. Carter from Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Administrator Griswold, for being here with us today. There are at least 5 major Army Corps of Engineer projects that are being held up in my district currently due to funding gap. With INF having been implemented and the DRF, Disaster Recovery Fund, running low, what happens if this fund is not replenished by Congress?
Congressman, the projects that you currently mentioned, the obligations are on hold because they're not life-saving, life-sustaining projects, and we want to continue to reserve what's left of the DRF to support those efforts for things like we saw in Hurricane Idalia or in the Maui wildfires. As soon as the DRF is replenished, you have my commitment to begin reimbursing these projects on a first-in, first-out basis. And we will work around the clock 7 days a week to expedite those payments, but we cannot do so until the DRF is replenished.
We know that the time frame that we previously have known as hurricane season is dramatically extending year over year. If the $2.4 billion storm were to hit right now and empty the DRF, what would happen if a subsequent disaster struck with the disaster recovery fund sitting on zero?
We are monitoring our disaster relief fund very closely, which is why that we implemented the immediate needs funding. If we have another catastrophic event that happens at the same time, we will continue to prioritize those most critical life-saving activities to ensure that we have the resources that can go into communities and save lives. Continue to delay the obligations for the recovery projects, and then perhaps, if needed, for some of those life-sustaining projects that are happening so we can focus our efforts on life safety.
We know that these storms come harder, come faster, stay longer, leave more devastation in their path. We also know that there is a looming chance that the government can shut down or even have a continuing resolution. In the case of such a drastic act of shutting down the government or having a continuing resolution that freezes funding, what does that do to your agency and all of the ongoing natural disasters that you're currently facing?
Should a lapse in appropriations occur, then anything that would remain in our disaster relief fund carryover balance would be moved forward, but given our current state, it would be insufficient to cover all of our ongoing life-saving operations, and we would, again, have to continue to reduce the scope of what it is that we are supporting in our operations. We would be legally able to incur obligations for activities necessary for life-saving and protection of human life, but again, we would have to further reduce those types of life-saving operations that we are working on based on the amount of funding that we have available.
Isn't it true that if such an action of shutting down the government or having a continuing resolution that drastically impedes your ability to provide resources impacts Democrats, Republicans, independents, and the like throughout our country?
A lapse in appropriation for FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund has an impact on everybody across this nation from, again, our ability to do life-saving actions in a number of places, as well as ongoing recovery projects, regardless of where they're at.
As a result of climate change, deadly heat waves have gripped our nation from coast to coast. What step is the agency taking to mitigate heat hazards in our community? In my state alone, wildfires that we have unprecedented in Louisiana, Bayou Sauvage burning out of control. Share with us what measures you're taking. We see this happening more and more in places it's never happened before. People that have never suffered these calamities are now dealing with them. Share with us what actions your agency is taking to address them.
Yeah, I think, Representative Carter, what you have described is this convergence of multiple climate-related hazards that are coming together on communities in ways that we haven't seen before, where, decades of drought combined with extreme heat creating unprecedented wildfires in areas or heat domes in areas that are lasting longer than they ever have. Our mitigation programs definitely can help support communities to better understand the types of threats and risks that they not just face today, but the risks that they're going to face in the future, and how we can use our mitigation funds to help mitigate and reduce the impact of these risks, whether it's creating green space and white roofs to reduce the impact of heat, or hazard mitigation to help reduce the spread of wildfires in communities that have that type of threat. Our mitigation programs are so critical to helping communities across this country better understand what their risk is and how we can help reduce the impact so they don't have these long, complex recoveries, but most of all, that we can save lives.
Thank you very much. My time is up. And Madam Chair, I'm just going to end with this statement, because I will never pass up an opportunity when in your presence to talk about Risk Rating 2.0 and the devastation that it has, particularly in Louisiana, but in multiple other states. And I will continue to encourage that we put our heads together. Thank you for the time that you've spent in discussing back and forth this issue that is far yet resolved. But I thank you for the efforts, and I implore you to continue working with us in a bipartisan way to address the issue of risk rating 2.0 that is devastating, particularly for Louisiana. Thank you, ma'am. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. The chair looks forward to yielding to Mr. Graves from Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank my friend from Louisiana for bringing up some local issues, and I want to pick up where he left off. Administrator, we had a chance to cover some ground in Louisiana in the past and talk through a number of issues, and in this case, I want to talk about where Mr. Carter left off, and that's risk rating 2.0. You're part of the federal government that is comprised of our hundreds of millions of citizens. We, I think, thrive on transparency and accountability. The fact that FEMA has continued to hide behind this proprietary model on the methodology for determining rates for risk rating 2.0, and Mr. Carter and I are incapable of explaining to the people that we represent why their rates have gone from $560 a year under preferred risk to $8,000 or $9,000 a year. It's not okay that we can't explain it. It's not okay that FEMA tries to hide behind this proprietary model. And I just want to ask you, would you make transparent the methodology and allow us to explain to our constituents why their rates are skyrocketing, explain to our constituents how levy protection and other features are actually benefiting them, that in many cases, property taxes, sales taxes, and appropriations, Congressman Carter and I and others have been able to secure, are actually making them safer.
Congressman, risk rating 2.0, I believe one of the most important factors about risk rating 2.0 is that it bases our flood insurance rates on a home's unique risk. And while we have seen a significant amount of policies across the nation that have had decreases, we also know that now that we understand a home's unique risk, many of the policies, many of which are in Louisiana, their rates have gone up. We have provided several
That's not
briefings,
answering
and
the
we
question
have-
on transparency. The question is transparency. I can't explain to a constituent why their rates have doubled, tripled, quadrupled, or what have you. I can't explain to a constituent how the levy that is right behind their house actually provides them a level of protection if FEMA's refusing to be transparent. You're part of the federal government. This lack of transparency, it's not okay. And the fact that you have some places where rates are skyrocketing, these people are, according to your maps, outside the flood zone. Like it doesn't make sense. And something, if we're just going to talk common sense for just a minute, homes are static structures in many cases. A concrete slab at grade, I understand we've come in and elevated them under ICC and other programs, but in reality, if people complied with the rules at the time they built their home, in some cases these homes have been here for hundreds of years, and all of a sudden we're going to come in and change conditions on them, and we're going to refuse to provide any degree of transparency, I'd like a commitment from you that you're going to be transparent and provide the methodology to the American public, let people look at it, understand it, and perhaps perfect it.
Congressman Graves, we continue to provide briefings to your staff and others on how we have
I'll
developed
take
this
that as a
program,
no. And as
but
we're
I will
talking about
continue
lack
to
of
work with you
transparency,
to
I want to talk about something else. There was a meeting that was held at the White House on May 11th of this year with the National Security Council, FEMA, and others talking about NSC stepping in and taking over effectively coordination of disasters or emergencies. That's what Congress charged you to do. Can you shed any light on what this is that the White House is coming in and taking this over? Can you share documents with the committee and help us understand this better, since we're the ones who actually write the laws?
Thank you for that question. Recovery is and will remain one of the core functions that FEMA does, and we are always looking for ways that we can improve on how we deliver not just our programs, but help coordinate the federal family for long-term recovery. Maui is a great example of how we have set up a long-term recovery operation in the county with the state, using the leadership of our state and local leadership to help drive the requirements. There's always room to improve, and one of the things that we are working as a result of Hawaii with the NSC on is bringing together our cabinet secretaries to help ensure that they have visibility of all of the things that their programs and their agencies are doing on the ground. That is the commitment that I have to continue to support communities like Maui with these long-term recovery operations, making sure that FEMA sustains their role of being that agency that has the ability to coordinate across all federal agencies.
So Administrator, look, you got a tough job. You do, and I appreciate your willingness to do it. Every time you step in, it's because there's a disaster. That's not an enviable position. But I want to be clear that the Congress has charged you with that responsibility. And if there is some proposed change there, this committee deserves transparency to make sure that we believe it's consistent with the law and congressional intent. And I just want to ask your commitment to provide us transparency on this as well. Is that a commitment that you're willing to provide?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Last thing, and I know I be quick here. Duplication of benefits drives me crazy because I watch our federal government be incredibly inefficient. We have resiliency programs or mitigation programs in FEMA and Corps of Engineers and HUD, in Interior, at Department of Agriculture, in NOAA, and many, many others. We explicitly wrote a change in the law in DARA in 18 that said that duplication of benefits with Corps of Engineer programs and HMGP does not exist, meaning you can pay for it through HMGP. Yet I've watched where FEMA has refused and said that you could not provide HMGP funds to a Corps project that was in the 7001 report, that I'll make note, does not mean it's funded. Yet you've had the situations where Washington, D.C. has gotten funds for, quote, tree equity. I don't know what the hell that is. Gotten money for tree equity. Meanwhile, Portland has gotten funds through similar programs. So why is it that if Forest Service is going to fund urban tree planting, how come FEMA will fund it as well through BRIC? Why isn't that a duplication of benefits?
I don't have the specifics of
Could you
why we
please
did or
give
not,
us
but
an
be
answer
happy
on
to
that?
follow
Would you
up
mind?
with your
Thank you.
staff
I
on
appreciate it.
that.
I'm sorry for going over. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. The chair will recognize Mr. Stanton from Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for allowing me to participate in the subcommittee to discuss an issue of great importance and urgency to my home state in Arizona. Administrator Criswell, communities along the southern border are on the front lines of an ongoing humanitarian crisis. Right now, federal migrant holding facilities are well over capacity. Last week, DHS began unnoticed release of migrants on the streets of small, rural Arizona communities like Bisbee, Nogales, and Douglas, Arizona. And instead of providing the necessary resources to support these border communities in housing, feeding, transporting vulnerable migrants, the federal government has shifted federal assistance away from Arizona to other states and made it much harder for local governments to get reimbursed for costs incurred. Now, I'm a former mayor, and I know how tight municipal budgets are, but frankly, it is insulting that the federal government is forcing them in to such a precarious financial position. Administrator, I'm particularly concerned about FEMA's complete lack of transparency in how the Shelter and Services Program funds are allocated, and why such a disproportionately small amount of the overall funding has come to Arizona's overwhelmed border communities. In its June guidance, FEMA stated simply that eligible applicant allocations were, quote, based on release and destination data received from CBP and Emergency Food and Shelter Program humanitarian requests made in fiscal year 2023, unquote. No other information was provided for how these funds would be allocated. The Southern Arizona Coalition, which includes Pima and Santa Cruz counties, the city of Tucson, and Catholic Community Services, has a combined monthly costs that have averaged more than $2 million a month this summer, and their costs are steadily rising as DHS releases more than 1,000 migrants on average every day. But they were eligible to apply for just $10.9 million in assistance through the Shelter and Services Program, while New York, 2,000 miles away, received 10 times that. I've been told the funds Southern Arizona has received will only last about 5 months. That's due in part to deep cuts these local governments and nonprofits that were forced to make in other areas. It is simply not right. Administrator Criswell, why is there such an enormous disparity between the resources allocated to border communities compared to interior communities under this program? Shouldn't the needs of Arizona's border communities and those in other border states be weighed more heavily when allocating these critical funds?
Representative Stanton, we know that there is great need out there for these funds, and through our legacy program, the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, humanitarian, with the direction of Congress to establish our new shelter and services program, we used our legacy program to administer the first portion of that funding, which highly favored our border cities. As we implemented the shelter and services program, we did begin to take into greater account release data, but also destination data, as we understand that communities across the country are incurring costs as they're providing shelter and services for the migrants. As we move into the next fiscal year, and if the program continues to be funded, we will be basing this more on a competitive program to take into account the existing data and impacts that communities are experiencing as we make decisions for future funding allocations.
So are you committing today that FEMA will make this moving forward a competitive grant program like the Emergency Food and Shelter Program to disperse funds?
The Emergency Food and Shelter Program was not a competitive grant program as compared to our traditional grant programs. The Shelter and Services Program will be more of a competitive program similar to our other grant programs.
I'm happy to hear that there'll be additional rounds of funding. When that funding occurs, how will you address the significant shortfall by Arizona's border communities in responding to the increased number of asylum seekers being released by DHS?
This program, even through our legacy program, but as well as the shelter and service program, continues to be oversubscribed, and I anticipate it will continue to be oversubscribed. We will use data collected from CBP to help make those decisions, but again, we know that many communities will not get enough funding for the costs that they are incurring.
SSP funding is far more restrictive in covering costs incurred by local governments and NGOs. Why are SSP funds so much more restrictive than the funding received previously under the Emergency Food and Shelter Service Program? What was the rationale for capping hotel costs now when it previously wasn't capped?
I would have to go back with my team on some of the specifics on how we made those decisions and those requirements within our program. But again, this program is a new program for FEMA. This was the first iteration of the Shelter and Service Program. We always continue to improve based on the lessons learned on the initial allocation of those funds. Happy to continue to work with you and your staff on ways we can continue to improve.
Madam Chair, I have one final quick question, if I might, dealing with extreme heat, another important issue to Arizona. Are extreme heat declarations eligible for a Stafford Act disaster declaration, or does the Stafford Act need to be amended to include extreme heat conditions?
The Stafford Act does not need to be amended to include extreme heat. We base our decisions on a number of factors, mostly on what does it exceed the capacity of the state and local jurisdictions. If the response to an extreme heat incident exceeds the capacity of a state and local jurisdiction, they are very open to submit a disaster declaration request, and we will consider that based on whether or not it exceeds their capacity.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. The chair will recognize Mr. Rouser from North Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank the Madam Chair and Madam Administrator. Thank you so much for being here. As my friend and colleague Garrett Graves, pardon me. I know Grigsby somewhere else. As my colleague Mr. Graves mentioned, there's no question you have a tough job. I will reiterate what he underscored, in that the duplication of benefits really is a big issue for a lot of us. And we would love to see the administration stick with the intent of Congress, on that, because that certainly is a big issue for many of our disaster survivors. Speaking of disasters, we have a lot of hurricanes come through. Obviously, my district is southeastern North Carolina. In 2016, we had Hurricane Matthew, had a lot of flooding with that. In 2018, we had Hurricane Florence, a tremendous amount of flooding with that. And, it's quite common for residents who live in condominiums, homeowners associations, housing cooperatives, that when those natural disasters hit, they can get no assistance from FEMA. And just curious if you foresee that that will continue to be the case, or if there's been any internal discussion about modifying the rules and regulations to where they would be eligible moving forward.
So, Congressman, people who own their homes, whether that be a individual home, whether that be a condo, whether they're a renter in one of those homes, they're all eligible for our programs. Our decisions are based on a number of factors. One is most certainly the amount of insurance they have and what insurance covers, and then whether they have actual damages to their homes and what we can repair for those homes. But we also provide things like rental assistance, which people are eligible for regardless of whether they're a homeowner or a renter. If there's something specific that you have an example of, I'd be happy to work with your staff to look at it and better understand what that circumstance was. But there's no factor that does not allow somebody who owns a condo to be eligible for our programs.
Well, historically, FEMA has been very resistant to helping those that are technically classified as a homeowners association. And many people live in, neighborhoods, big and small, that have a homeowners association, and therefore they can't get debris picked up. There's always, municipalities get reimbursed through public assistance for picking up debris, et cetera. Well, they won't pick up debris in a homeowners association, for that reason. I have some legislation that will help clarify this and, make everybody's life a little easier. It is H.R. 3777, the Disaster Assistance Fairness Act. But I'm not so sure that what's included in the legislation couldn't be addressed with a simple rulemaking because it very much fits within the intent and scope of FEMA's work during disaster recovery. And so I'd love to visit with you more about that and offline, and appreciate your attention to it.
Yeah, thank you for that further explanation, and we'd be happy to provide direct technical assistance, drafting technical assistance on what you're working on.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rouser. With that, the chair recognizes Mr. Ryan from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for allowing me to join. Thank you, Administrator, not only for your service to our nation now, but also for your service to New York in your previous roles. As I believe you're aware, and certainly your team is aware, several communities in my district in the Hudson Valley of New York, Cornwall, Highland Falls, Fort Montgomery, and West Point were absolutely devastated in early July with unprecedented over 8 inches of rain in just a few hours, absolutely overwhelming all of the systems, processes, resources that the community had ever had to deal with or prepare for. Tragically, we did lose one young woman to that flood. We've had hundreds displaced. Since the flood, my team and I have personally spoken with hundreds of affected residents. As is always the case, and you know this well, each of their stories is just heartbreaking. One that I cannot stop thinking about, a veteran in my community, 100% disability rating from the VA, who suffered TBI and other serious injuries, still fighting and struggling to get any help to rebuild his home that was completely condemned. And despite all the work by you and your team, despite the declaration of a federal disaster and some of the public assistance, folks like him and hundreds of others are still without any help and any relief. Almost none of them had flood insurance because of the topography of where they live. It was absolutely almost impossible that they could have experienced something like this, but tragically they did. So I want to commend you and thank the President and the administration for pushing to declare the disaster declaration, for working with a good team on the ground to start to get the public assistance flowing. But the number one question that I hear still in our office is, why have we not received an individual assistance declaration? Both the breadth, but really the depth of the damage for several hundred families is just devastating. And the gentleman's story that I shared is just one. We've got kids living in condemned homes because they just have no other options, seniors without homes. So I've invited you to come. I know you're very busy, but I would ask you or one of your senior leaders to commit to come and look those folks in the eye with me, help explain what's going on and brainstorm what we can do to help them. Can we count on you to do that, Administrator?
Yeah, absolutely. I obviously don't have the specifics on why we haven't yet. Happy to look into that personally, but you have my commitment. If I can't make it, one of my senior leaders can join you to better understand the impacts to this community.
I appreciate it. And building on questions from several of my colleagues, specifically Mr. Huffman, can you explain why in the midst of a disaster like this, it is so darn hard and complicated and opaque, which seems to be a theme that we've heard throughout the questioning, that we can't just answer residents who are devastated why they're not getting individual assistance and what we can do to change that, what my team and I, what all the local officials and our governor and our county leadership and local leadership who've all been working as a team. Can you help explain that?
Yeah, there are a number of factors that we look at when we are making a determination on whether to recommend a declaration for both public assistance and individual assistance. And again, a good portion of that falls on what the capacity of not just the local jurisdiction is, but what the state should be able to do to also support. And we understand when there's communities, small rural communities in states like New York that have large urban centers, that it creates a greater capacity that the state should be able to come in and also provide a level of assistance. And so all of those are factors that are taken into consideration, not just the impact to the one community, but how much the state should also be able to support.
And I appreciate your commitment to personally look into this. I can tell you on the ground, while the state has contributed significantly, it is nowhere near meeting the need, specifically for folks, frankly, that don't qualify for some of the income thresholds, but had no flood insurance and are far beyond their means to repair devastating damage. So we have to, as Americans, be able to figure out how to navigate this. And myself and my team will be available anytime, anywhere to you and your team. So thank you to your folks that have been on the ground and helping. And we'll certainly be persistent in following up with you on your kind commitment today. So thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, I apologize.
The chair thanks the gentleman. The chair is now in agreement with the ranking member that we're going to go for a second round. And so the chair will recognize himself for the beginning of that second round of questions. Administrator Criswell, I think you highlighted the CREW Act in your testimony now and verbally numerous times regarding how it helped in staffing shortages. Yet in your letter and your responses to letters from Chairman Graves, FEMA resources and personnel have been diverted to help deal with the border crisis. And I'd ask the unanimous consent to have these emails admitted to the record and without objection so ordered. On March 17th, an email of yours provided to the committee in response to these oversight letters shows that you emailed Secretary Mayorkas that both you and FEMA's Region 3 administrator had discussed the current state of coordination based on her observations. Everything you said is kind of unclear because it's heavily redacted, as you can see here, but what I can see is that you expressed concerns committing her to no longer than 30 days, and then on the following day, on March 18th, you received an email from the Secretary thanking you for supporting FEMA Region 3 administrators' dedication to the border coordination with IMAT support for a 30-day period. Now, the IMAT teams are specialties, as I understand it, that deal with disasters. Does that mean you and the Secretary agree there's a disaster on the border? I mean, you sent one of these. Go ahead, ma'am.
Our incident management assistance teams are unique teams that are trained to deal with complex problems. And the skill set that they bring, specifically the team that our Region 3 administrator leads, is a team made up of collateral leaders across our agency designed to support a variety of different incidents to help bring that level of collaboration, coordination, and communication, the skill set that our emergency managers bring to all of the problems that we solve.
Okay, so it's not about disasters.
So this was specifically about creating an organizational structure to help support our partners across the department, establish a sound, unified coordination.
So I guess by transposition, then, if it's not a disaster and it's to create this team, then we're saying that apparently Secretary Mayorkas and Department of Homeland Security doesn't have what it needs is not equipped to handle what's happening on the southern border because they're calling on you. You're resource challenged by your admission. You even were concerned per your email. Then in November, you emailed the secretary, indicated that he had requested support again from your Region 3 administrator on the border. And I would remind you that Region 3 covers Pennsylvania and the district I am proud to represent. And I'm concerned about those folks in the district that are paying the taxes for FEMA to support them, and to remind everybody that Region 3, the district we're talking about, or the region we're talking about, had 11 major disaster declarations, not including COVID, during that period. I'm concerned as you are, how many personnel, how many people did FEMA send to the border, and what was the duration, since I can't find out from these emails?
The specific instance that you are talking about with our Region 3 Regional Administrator, again, is part of a NIMAT team that's made up of collateral personnel from across our agency, many from headquarters, our Region 3.
Okay, that's great. How many for how long?
They have a handful of people. I don't know exactly how many from that team, but that team is only 12 people, and they
So
went
it wouldn't be more than 12?
It would not be more than 12.
Okay, and you don't know how long or how many instances at this point?
That team was sent to here in DC to work with our partners across the department to help them establish what is now the Southwest Border Coordination Center, and they helped them
Okay, but while they were here in DC or out the southwest border, they weren't focused on Region 3, which is Pennsylvania, which is what they were hired to do. It's what they're supposed, that's their daily responsibility, right? And while we're having disasters in that region, they're focused on Washington, DC, and the border particularly. I mean, that's what I see here. I mean,
Again, the only person on that team from Region 3 is the one person who is the lead. This is a team that's
But that's
made up-
also the person in Region 3 that's the lead for Region 3.
But this team is made up of collateral personnel to come help support a variety of incidents.
I get it,
We
but
happened to
my point
activate
is
them for
that
this one.
this person is not focused on the regions that's having disasters because they're focused on the border. And while we might disagree or agree why the border disaster is happening, I would contend that it's happening because of the policies of this administration. So the people in Pennsylvania that are paying for their region administrator don't get their region administrator because the administration determines that that person is going to be on the southwest border or in Washington, D.C., dealing with a southwest border problem caused by this administration. Let me ask you this final question. Who's paying for that? Who's paying for that?
For the Region 3.
For the IMAT team, for the Region 3 coordinator, for the person that's supposed to be in Pennsylvania, that's in Washington, D.C., dealing with the southwest border, who's paying for that?
These are part of our appropriated
FEMA
funds.
is paying for that. So FEMA's paying for the border, right? So when you pay your taxes and we say, oh, well, that's all going to the Department of Homeland Security, this portion to secure the border, that's not true. Department of Homeland Security is now requiring FEMA to take some of their disaster relief people and send them somewhere to deal with the border. That's how we're also dealing with it. So it's costing doubly. Not only is Homeland Security, and by the way, I don't know if people realize this, but you're not supposed to be duplicating services that are provided by another agency, whether it's Interior, whether it's Forestry. You're doing that with planting trees as well, by the way. That's another story. But on this occasion, you are duplicating services that are supposed to be handled by the Department of Homeland Security with FEMA dollars, and yet FEMA is demanding and asking, and maybe rightly so in many cases, for a supplemental for disaster assistance funding. At the same time, they're spending America's tax-paying dollars that are supposed to go to disaster relief on the southwest border in a disaster created by policy by this administration. With that, I yield, and I recognize the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Thank you. Let's go back and talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. It's been called the greatest investment in environmental policy in a lifetime. One of the things that it did was authorize FEMA's public assistance and hazard mitigation programs to provide reimbursement for the use of low-carbon materials and incorporate future climate projections into their emergency management plans. Use net zero energy as well. Would you talk about how that has been helpful, how you're leveraging that, how it fits into your overall recovery and replacement or rebuilding schemes?
We're grateful for that added ability to reimburse jurisdictions that use this type of construction methodology to, one, increase their resilience as we're rebuilding, but also reduce the impact on our environment. And so this is a new program. These are the types of projects that take years to build. I'm very excited to see how our jurisdictions across the country are now going to be able to build back in a way that not only makes them more resilient, but makes them better for the environment as we go forward.
Wouldn't this kind of epitomize build back better, so we don't build back just the way it was before the disaster, so that if that incident occurs again, we are faced with the whole same problem one more time?
Absolutely. Our goal is to build back better so communities do not have to repeat the complex recoveries that they're facing today.
So in the long run, this would be a more efficient use of taxpayer dollars, and it'd probably be cheaper as you, amortize it out over future disasters.
Every dollar that we invest in mitigation saves $6 in recovery.
Okay. And is that across all kinds of disasters, whether it's fire or hurricane or whatever? It's just a general?
That's the current studies show that a dollar invested in mitigation saves $6 in recovery. I'm sure it varies slightly from type of event to type of event, but that is the recent study that came out shows how much mitigation does save our taxpayers in the end from recovery.
So this would be a good thing to save taxpayer dollars while also trying to save the planet.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair, thanks the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Lamolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thanks for allowing me to sit in here and for a second round of questions today. Appreciate it. So, Ms. Griswold, again, thank you for your appearance and for the coordination we've been able to have with FEMA in Northern California after the many disasters. So, in recovery from wildfires in my own district, we've had a lot of great strides, but some bureaucratic challenges, not necessarily in your department, have delayed progress and really true recovery so that victims can get back to normal. So just removing hazardous trees or to build housing, fix a road, the local jurisdiction must do a NEPA. Every project within the recovery process has a separate NEPA requirement, which can take a year to produce, and oftentimes for things that are very basic. You wouldn't need a full-blown NEPA for changing a culvert or repairing especially already existing infrastructure. So not much has changed on the process of how NEPAs are done. So my constituents continue to say, hey, this is such a pain for them. It really does take more time, and sometimes opportunities as grant dollars run out and permits, other types of permits may expire. So, or more conditions keep getting added on. So it would be, I believe, and many folks have weighed in with me, that couldn't we have one big regional NEPA after, in this case, a wildfire, for the whole burn scar and have that applicable for all recovery and mitigation projects tied to a disaster that was declared by the president? Wouldn't that seem like a common sense way of doing it, just having an area-wide, in this case, burn scar-wide NEPA, and do it as a catch-all instead of so much duplication like this zone, this project? Is that something we could strive for, do you believe?
There are a number of policies out there when we're doing our environmental and historic reviews, and NEPA is certainly one of those that are out there. There are tools in our toolbox that can do programmatic reviews, but again, each instance is very different. We would have to work with each jurisdiction to better understand how we can apply broader application of our tools, which we have done in some areas, but we can't do it in every area because they're all so specific. And so I can't give you a general answer, but happy to continue to work with you on ways that we can streamline this process, because we also recognize it's one of those pieces of this recovery and rebuilding effort that has some of the longer timelines associated with it.
Well, thank you. Indeed, in the Paradise area, the Camp Fire, we're going to be 5 years in November, and we're still chasing permits to remove hazardous trees. These are dead trees that are, not going to be part of the landscape or a positive part, maybe a handful for woodpeckers, but not to the extent there's acres and acres. And this is still keeps just a dark cloud over recovery, over building, and indeed getting insurance again for the area. The insurance companies are pulling out of California and pulling out of areas like this, even though what you would really look at, the risk has changed completely after that, such a devastating fire, such a complete fire. Once these trees are removed, it'll be a much more insurable area for folks. And you have folks, one lady, one anecdote, and I'll stop. A lady and her, I think, 2 kids were when they're in their home. And during a wind event, trees were falling over, dead trees. And you could hear them cracking that haven't fallen yet. She finally decided she was gonna have to get her family out of her home because she was within reach of some of the trees and go take a hotel down the hill in the town of Chico rather than stay in her home, because we keep hanging on with an inability to quickly and efficiently remove the hazardous trees that still exist there. So we don't need to NEPA to death every little project, indeed a coordination of projects into one. The darn NEPA doesn't teach you that much anyway. I don't know if they even read the thing, at the end of the day. Is it gonna affect a yellow-toed salamander or what have you? The work is gonna get done. It needs to get done. It's just a lot more pain. So if you could, we need help on that Lake Madrone thing, as we mentioned a while ago. And if in your conversations with the regulators on this, please emphasize that a broader approach, a burn scar approach, would be very helpful for everybody, I'm sure for your department and for the people that are actually victims. So thank you for that, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Are there any further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank each of the witness for her testimony and for being here today. It's tough questions, tough job. We appreciate you. And we thank you for coming and taking the heat. This hearing is adjourned.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3.
You're at next 6 right now.
Okay, so I'm far from the microphone. How about now? Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, let me raise it up just a little bit for you.
Okay.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. All right, so we'll keep it like that.
You sound a little overdriven.
How about now?
How's that, Larry?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello. Testing 1, 2, 3. You want to go down?
No, I gotta come up.
Come up.
Talk more.
Okay, testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello. Testing 1, 2, 3.
You hear Larry?
No, what did he say?
How far from the mic are you?
I'm like 3 inches.
Oh, yeah. You need to come up more. Come up more.
I will give you more. Yeah, but guess what? If somebody loud gonna talk. I will use another microphone because the one that I was talking to you. Oops. Yeah, testing 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. Good, thank you. Yeah, I will take it down a little bit. Thank you. Thanks.
here for the hearing? Oh,
And Christian's testifying.
Hey, Tyler.
Hi,
Buddy, so
Todd.
good to meet
Nice
you.
to meet you. Brenda Larson, Christian Spain. This is Amos, photographer Todd.
Awesome.
So I was trying to tell him how little this
It's a
is.
small.
But we want, when Christian testifies, we'd like some photos, but we don't want to get in the way of anybody.
problem, yeah.
So show Todd, please, where, you know.
Yeah, I was just talking to one of
Todd,
my
thank you.
colleagues about it too, and who does the press stuff. So really, you can get here, for example, or like here. The only tricky thing is once you get in front of the members, you just want to make sure that you're not like in front of them directly.
Okay.
So, but if you're like doing this is totally fine.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
Right.
and you can go over here wherever. Actually, I can tell you where it'll be at too. So actually, he should be on that side. Okay. Yeah, so he'll be over on that side.
Yeah, Christian is the minority.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so this.
Is it cool if I sit here and then I can?
No, that's where the staff.
Oh, the staff.
Normally the
Okay.
staff will sit here, yeah.
Right back here.
You can definitely get
That
out
last,
and
that,
be
because
here.
you'll be going in and out probably too.
Perfect.
Okay,
All right.
but put your thing right there, because it gets packed. It's gonna be a packed one, because
Yeah.
we couldn't get the big room because they're doing a full committee on something else.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's like, you know, it's always something going on, and we luckily we don't tend to have too many days like this, but
No, you don't.
we do have them sometimes, and this is one of them. So yeah, it's been a good week though.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
This poor woman from Alaska, the Democrat, her husband was
Yeah,
voted
it's terrible. I know, it was recent as well.
this week.
Oh gosh, it was
He
really
was
sad.
hot.
Test, test, test. Oh my gosh, good, good, good. Test, test, test. Witness mic 2. Witness mic 3. All right. 4, witness mic 4. All right. Member mic, member mic. Test, 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 1, 2, 3.
I can't get it in if I do it.
Oh, well. You ready?
Okay, go ahead.
Test. 1, 2.